Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maryam, and as you know by now, I am the host of Television. So today, we're having a conversation with a young lady from the Institute of Social Justice, and we're going to talk about something that I love talking about, and that is the issue of mass incarceration. And in my opinion, we cannot talk about mass incarceration if we're not talking about Michelle Alexander's book. So before we get into that discussion, I want you to introduce yourself to the audience and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chane Jones. I am an associate counsel for the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I am a Newark native, born, raised, and still living in the South Ward. And I work primarily under the civic engagement pillar at the Institute, where I focus on rights restoration for those who are incarcerated, on parole, or on probation.
Oh, okay. And how long have you been doing that?
Almost a year now.
How do you like that?
I absolutely love it. It's important for me to be able to do work that actually impacts the community that I'm from. And so the Institute provides me with the unique opportunity to do that. So
I like that. I like that response. So tell me, you are familiar with Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow?
Yes, I am.
Mass Incarceration,
Yes.
Color Blindness.
Yes.
And I met Michelle Alexander a few years ago when she came to Bethany Baptist Church. And in the book, what really struck me about her story, because her story was that she was representing clients who were complaining about the police and what the police was doing to them, how they were treating them and everything. And she didn't believe it. And she believed it once her son got arrested. And once her son got arrested, the new Jim Crow came out, right? So I want to read a passage from her book. And anyone who doesn't have this book, you need to get this book, The New Jim Crow, by Michelle Alexander, because everything today is so apropos to what's happening, So it says, the New Jersey data showed that, and I know the brothers who's coming on after you, Houston Stevens, I know he knows this already. In New Jersey, the data showed that only 15% of all drivers on the New Jersey Turnpike were racial minorities, yet 40% of all stops and 73% of all arrests were of black motorists, despite the fact that blacks and whites violated traffic laws at almost exactly the same rate, while radar stops were relatively consistent with the percentage of minority violators. Discretionary stops made by the officers involved in drug interdictions resulted in doubling the numbers of stops of minorities. A subsequent study conducted by the Attorney General of New Jersey found that searches on the turnpike were even more discriminatory than the initial stops. 77% of all consent searches were of minorities. So the reason why I wanted to read this was because today, whenever I go on any social media, it's always about black people, black men who are being arrested, discriminated, about something that's very minor. And now it's getting to the point where we're dealing with women who are being arrested, women who are who are being abused by the police, and also children now. So I want to ask you a question about the consent decree that we have here in the city of Newark. How is that going? Because, as you know, well, I know you know, it was set up because of the discrimination that was going on with the police officers. I mean, I remember when I worked at Delaney Hall, we had guys that would come in for loitering, for like sitting on the steps, like little minor things. So now that we're under this decree, how is that going for Newark residents?
I would say it's going fairly well. We still have a lot more work to do in that area, but when you look at the work that has been done so far, there's been positive changes that have been made. One of the biggest is that the chief of the police was actually invited to speak for the commemoration of the Newark riots, and that's a major thing because the Newark riots had such an impact on the police-community relations. And so we see from our work with the consent decree is that there are pushes to make policy changes. So they've just laid out a community policy recently where they're looking at, putting back that foot on the block, as they call it, policing style, so that the police officers,
community policing?
Yeah, so that they can be more engaged with community members and that they're actually assigned towards things of that nature. We have engaged in survey processes that show that there are some community members who still feel as though there's a disconnect between the members of the community and the police officers. And currently at the Institute, what we are working on, my colleague Andrea McChristian, who is the director of our criminal justice reform pillar, is a reimagining police report where we are looking into policy prescriptions about how we can make policing more community-based so that the community members are the ones engaged in creating a safe environment, and so that they're actually members of the community, as opposed to what some people may feel sometimes are outsiders coming in to dictate what the law should be.
Usually that is what it is.
Yes.
A lot of police officers don't live in the city of Newark.
Yes.
So the uncomfortableness that we who do live in the city of Newark face with, with the police is kind of understandable. Now, we just had a recent killing here in the city by a police officer. And do you know what's going on with that? Because I just found out about it, since I don't really look at the news or anything like that anymore. Someone told me about it.
Right.
And normally there would be like an outrage or outcry, and there wasn't any, as far as I know about it. So with the decree, how is that, with cases like this, how is that helping Newark residents? And I want to get back to what you said about the director who spoke at a commemoration for the Newark riots. That was amazing. What was amazing that he said?
Well, not necessarily his words, but the fact that he was invited to come speak, because for years that had not been the case because the relationship was so strained. And so the fact that he was invited to this event to be able to speak showed that there was some easing of the tension. But again, there's still so much more work to be done in that area.
Yes. And as far as the policies are concerned, how are we? Because we set policies all the time, and that's what I'm noticing. Like it's just not here in Newark; it's around the country. We set policies, but they're not enforced policies. It's like police tend to have the opinion that they could do whatever they want to do to a civilian. So how are those policies being impacted for us?
So I think that's a twofold matter. The first one is being public education. So one of the things we engage in with the consent decrees is a lot of public hearings, as well as I would say community input options, where we actually have the community members and our youth council engage in a review of the policies that they're suggesting, and then look to see what it is that community members aren't understanding that may need to be changed in the policy so that a layperson can actually understand what their rights are. So that's the first component of that, is the public education and making sure that people know what the policies are and that they understand them so that they know their rights.
So now shouldn't the police officers also know how they should be acting towards the citizens and everything?
Yes, so that is another important component as well as the training. So these policies are also being introduced to the officers by way of training sessions so that they know what the policy is and how their conduct should be based on that policy. But I think the second half of that is also holding elected officials accountable, which is something that we hold very strongly at the Institute, is engaging community members to put that pressure on their elected officials when they don't see the changes that they want. So when we see that police officers or any elected official, because police officers are not elected officials, but any individual that is placed in a position of service to the community is not serving the needs of the community or is violating their rights, it's important for the community members to speak up and say, this is not what we want and we will not tolerate this. And to make their voice heard by way of protest, by way of voting, so that they can be able to actually see the changes that they want. So I think it's a twofold thing of public education and training officers, but also making sure that as community members, we understand our power to hold elected officials accountable, as well as police officers, and being able to say, this is not what we want our police department to look like, and so here's what we want, and we need you to implement that.
Right. So don't you think a lot of this has to do with the racist attitude that a lot of our police officers have towards the people who they are supposed to be serving and protecting? And again, it's not just here in Newark, it's all over the country, where it seems like because of the color of our skin, and not just only because of that, because we do have a new president in the office who also have those types of behaviors, and it seems like since he's been there, it's been escalating. So the fact that, for example, as a young woman, you can go out in the streets right now and just be disrespected by someone just because you are a black woman. You know, so I think racism definitely has a lot to do with what's going on, and that needs to be addressed. And I know when President Obama tried to address the racist issues about the cops and everything, he was attacked by it. So until we begin to address the racism that's taking place in here, we're going to continue to have these type of practices, because this is why I'm saying this. So this morning, I got up, right, and I was thinking about the Civil Rights Act that was passed, I think that was in 1964 or 5, right? Okay, and so when I looked at, I said, well, I was 13 years old at that time, you know? And so here, I'm 68 years old, and it seems like it's worse than what it was. And so that's only like 55 years. So 55 years, we came out from under Jim Crow, and that's like being a baby, you know. So I understand holding these the public officials accountable, because they absolutely should be, but also those that we put in office to work for us, because they are working for us. They're supposed to be serving and protecting us, not killing us or abusing us.
So to the first part of that, racism definitely plays a role. We see that nationally, and we see that here in New Jersey,
right.
Whether it be implicit bias or outright explicit bias, we see from the numbers that there is a significant difference in treatment based on race. In fact, in New Jersey, when it comes to just our juvenile justice system,
yes.
We have the highest racial disparity in terms of youth incarceration. So a
right.
young black child is 30 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white child, even though the studies show that white and black children commit crimes at the same rate.
Yes.
And for adults, it's 12 times. A black person is 12 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white individual.
Right.
And so we know from those numbers that there clearly is a difference in treatment based on race. I think the problem is that when we're talking about, the Civil Rights Act, is that we saw a lot of changes on the surface, but
yes.
what wasn't necessarily focused on was the policies. And so what happened is we have policies like felony disenfranchisement that were created and connected to our criminal justice system. And so you're able to pretty much discriminate against an entire group of people by
yes.
way of policy.
Right.
So here in New Jersey,
that's kind of like Jim Crow policy.
Right, Jim Crow policies,
okay.
but now just by way of laws. And so for those viewers who may not necessarily know what felony disenfranchisement is, here in the state of New Jersey, if you commit certain offenses, you lose the right to vote while you are incarcerated on parole or on probation.
Yes,
in New Jersey, about 100,000 people are not able to vote because of felony disenfranchisement. Half of those people are black.
Right.
So when we begin to look at policies such as felony disenfranchisement, looking at policies such as redlining, we begin to understand that even though we have those movements, which created significant change as they did on the surface level, there were a lot of policies that were then swept in underneath that that allowed for racism to persist, and specifically in our criminal justice system for those disparities and that discrimination to continue.
So we have over 2 million people in the criminal justice. I don't know why they call it criminal justice, because it's no justice, but we have over that, and the black people, African American people, make up like almost over half of that, and that's not including then those who are on parole, or those who are on probation as well, or those who are on the ISP, on the bracelet and everything, you know. So I know that Ryan, Mr. Yes, he has been very instrumental in fighting regarding the juvenile, closing of the juvenile facilities and everything. And also, just recently, we had Governor Murphy who said that he wanted to build a, you know what I'm saying, a youth prison
Yes.
in Newark.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So when people, became upset about it, it changed. So what's going on with that?
So we're still in the process of pushing to make sure that no youth prisons or no facilities are built in New Jersey until we do a thorough evaluation of our youth justice system. As you stated, our criminal justice system is questionable as to whether or not it renders justice.
Right.
And I think that's because in the U.S. our system is based more on punishment rather than rehabilitation or transformation.
Right.
And so with the juvenile justice system specifically, one of the things that we are adamant about is that no new facilities be built until there's research done on what the current facilities that currently exist are doing. So one of the things we push for first is the closure of all youth prisons.
Right.
We do not believe that children should be in prison at all. To the extent that children should be taken out of the home for safety reasons, we believe that they should be placed in rehabilitative centers where they're still close to their community and they can receive the wraparound services that they need to be able to return home and succeed and thrive in our society. So we seek the closure of all three of the youth prisons. Currently, the youth prisons are less than half filled. And there are about 205 young people who are incarcerated. 150 of those are Black children, and 16 are white. So again, just speaking to that racial disparity. And so what we've been pushing for, we pushed for the Youth Justice Task Force to be created. We rallied for that, and Governor Murphy did sign the executive order. They've met about twice now. And what their task is looking at what the youth closure should look like, the youth prison closure should look like. How do we close these facilities and bring these children back to their home communities and provide them with the services that they need? The other important thing, which goes to the plans that were put forth to build a youth facility, is that the intent was to spend $160 million building that facility here in Newark. What we have advocated for, and we continue to advocate for.
How much is it?
$160 million. Yes. So let me just go back a little bit. What most people don't realize, and if you look at the budget for 2020, there's been an increase. The state intends to spend $289,000 to incarcerate one child for 1 year in a youth facility. Now, I know what my student loan debt looks like, and it's far less than that. That is the cost of sending a child to college.
But see, just with that, I start stuttering and everything, right? But now I'm going back. They $289,000 to incarcerate
one child for 1 year.
And when we look at the education budget for the city of Newark, it's like, I don't know exactly how much it is, but I know it's nowhere near that.
Right.
So we're paying to incarcerate our young children as opposed to educating them so that they will not be incarcerated.
Exactly.
So that goes back to what I said earlier, the racism that is associated with that, because the children who are going to be in those facilities will be our children.
Exactly. Yes. So one of the things we have been pushing for is that those funds, the $160 million that was proposed for the building of the new facility, that $289,000 that's going towards one child for 1 year to be incarcerated, that those be put back into the communities that are most impacted by the justice system. So areas like Camden, Trenton, Newark, Patterson, that they be put back into those communities to create alternative programs, whether it be counseling services, whether it be athletic services, being put into their education, so that children aren't placed in positions where they're committing crime in the first place.
Yeah, and it should be put back into the system because the Newark Public Schools withdrew counselors.
Yes.
So and that was a crucial part of children who were having issues at home. Their ability to be able to come in and talk to someone. So that would be good if they were to do that. I want to get back to the consent decree, because the other concern that I had with that was, how are we paying for that? Because taxpayers are paying for that. So do you know how much we're paying for that?
I do not have the details on how much money is going towards that, but I would be happy to look into that and give you that information.
Okay, I know we paying for it. Because when I called DC like last year to find out how much are we paying for this, right? Which is something that we need. They said, well, Ms. Bay, you're going to have to call your local representative. So when I called the local representative, they said, they didn't know either how much they were paying, but we are paying more.
So, and that's another important aspect too, is when I give these numbers about the amount of money, the layperson, myself included, until you do the research and really dig, you don't know where this money is going. And once you start to look into it, you realize that money is being taken out of our pockets as taxpayers, but it's not necessarily going to our benefit.
Yes,
and so creating policies that make sure this money is going back to our communities.
Yes.
So that's what we focus on a lot. Going to the youth justice system. When I say that we push for this, it's not only through protesting and rallying, but we actually have introduced legislation that says we want that $160 million put in a lockbox fund so that it can be used for community-based programs.
Right.
And that those type of policies are the policies that we really try to push so that we can end this racial disparity and really, really deal with the discrimination that exists here in the state.
Well, see, we're not going to end racial discrimination because, see, until people, the white people look at us as human beings, we're not going to end that type of disparity because, again, there's a conversation that we all have to have about us treating each other as human beings, not according to our race, because remember, Dr. Martin Luther King said he wanted us to be judged by the content of our character, you know, and not by the color of our skin.
Right.
So today, we're judged by the color of our skin.
And I agree. I definitely think that it took years for us to get where we are now. We're not that far removed from slavery.
55 years.
Right.
Okay.
So it will take more and many more years. But I think books like Michelle Alexander's and the type of reports we produce are important because it goes back to what you shared about her earlier, which is that she didn't necessarily see the impact until it impacted her personally.
That's right.
And I think with many things in our lives, we don't necessarily give as much care or attention until we personally are impacted. But when we have reports like this where we can have numbers, and see the disparity in numbers, then we understand, like, wait a minute, this is a problem. So even if I'm not impacted by the felony disenfranchisement laws, I'm looking at the numbers and I'm seeing, okay, this is a problem. And it really makes us dig into how we view individuals in terms of their humanity.
And then the thing too is, like, once they are convicted and they have a felony, them being able to get a job, that definitely, you know, becomes an issue. And here's the thing that's very, very interesting. I lectured on Michelle's book when I worked at Delaney Hall, and when I go around, you know, the city to talk about the mass incarceration. I just recently found out that they're banning her book from the prisons.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I completely understand why they would do that. There's a passage that she has in there. It's said by it's a minister who makes the statement. He said that she said it. The new N-word is it's no longer okay. Thank you. Okay, it's no longer the N-word. It is the F word, and the F word is felony.
Yeah.
You know, so we have a lot of our young men that have felonies.
Right.
And even now, when and I just found this out too a few years ago, that even with getting a license, having a problem when you get pulled over by the cop because of your license or whatever, you can get a misdemeanor. And now with you having a misdemeanor, then that also can go on your record as well. Right. So it seems like the system is putting more things in place to harm people, and the people who is harming are Black people.
Yes. So it forces people to look at our criminal justice system for what it really is, which is modern day slavery.
Yeah.
It's used to continue to create barriers for people of color. When you look at first United States, our prison system, we are one of the smaller populations in the world. I think we only make up 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's incarcerated people.
Right.
And then when you speak to New Jersey, Black people make up 15% of New Jersey's population, but we make up 60% of the incarcerated.
That's right. That's true.
And so when you begin to look at that, you realize that the criminal justice system and the way in which it has been fashioned is a way to continue slavery by another name.
That's right. And that's the name of the book. It's called Slavery by Another Name. Right. Okay. Before we end, I just got the 5-minute mark. We do have something to celebrate though, because I think about a couple of weeks ago, the Civil Review Board was passed with subpoena power. So that's a good thing.
So it definitely is a victory for the Civil Complaint Review Board
Yes.
to be able to have that investigative power. But to see how that will be implemented is something that we're still looking at.
So you're still working on that?
Well, as part of the consent decree,
Okay.
we can't say too much about,
Okay, no problem.
whether that's a yay or nay.
Okay.
But what I will say is that it will be important for people to look at, number one, what the response to that will be, whether it will be appealed, and what the court will decide in that
I thought the
decision.
court supported it.
Yes, but I believe that the union may go and appeal.
Oh, okay.
Because it was
You're right.
it was affirmed in part and opposed in part.
Okay.
So I think that's number one, to look to see what may happen after this, but two, how that will be implemented, and how that will be enforced. So
Okay.
I think that's something important to look at.
So now, this is television.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your vision for what you're doing with the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice?
Oh, my vision is quite expansive. Well, would you like me to speak about the particular projects that I'm working on, or just
you,
the institute as a whole?
because you are a Newark resident
Yes.
and everything, so that's a great thing.
So I have the pleasure of currently working on a project in the South Ward, specifically focused on revitalization.
Okay.
And the goal is to change or decrease the absenteeism and transience number in schools, but from a holistic approach.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So looking at economic barriers, looking at police community relations, and looking at civic engagement. And so my vision for my community really is to have a society in which Newark the greatness of the people that come out of Newark can really be seen. I believe that Newark is a great place.
Yes.
I tell people all the time, I take pride in my city. And so I want to be able to create systems that give the opportunity for everyone's greatness within Newark to be seen by way of economic opportunities, so that people are able to engage in workplace environments that actually have a livable wage, and that they can afford the rent in the area, and that they can actually own a home one day.
Right, that's another conversation, gentrification.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would like to see people being able to get involved in politics. Pipeline programs that encourage children to be engaged in government, and to know what the laws are, and to know how laws are created, and to, if they have that passion, to be able to pursue that route at a young age, and really be actively involved in that process. For constituents to be more engaged in the policies that are created, as opposed to showing up to council meetings and voicing their concerns about a policy that exists, but to actually have input on the policies before they're even voted upon. So things like that are important to me, and for us to have a community where police are not necessarily needed to arrest or enforce laws, but just to make sure the community is safe. And that those police officers are members of the community, actually Newark natives. So.
Yeah, I like that. And how do you pronounce your name again?
Chane.
Because I was calling you something else. I don't want to do that.
I get that often.
So Chane, I want to thank you. You have been so informative, and to be such a young, beautiful woman and everything. And Ryan. You see how I mess up people's names?
Ryan Haygood.
Mr. Haygood, I mean, when I see him, I'm going to let him know what a fantastic guest you were.
Thank you.
And I really do appreciate the words that you have given us. My name is Maryam, and I am the host for television. And thank you very much, and have a great day.